Have you ever wondered how the tension between Iran and the United States began? Most would say that the root of this tension comes down to the actions leading to what happened on one specific day, August 19th, 1953, with an event known as the Iranian coup d'etat. The 1953 Iranian coup d'etat, known in Iran as the 28 Mordad coup, was funded and led by Great Britain with direct support from the CIA of the United States. The coup removed Mohammad Mossadegh from power and installed Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi as Iran's leader. The US and Britain both involved for different reasons, but both with the shared desire to remove Mossadegh from power and seat a leader with which they would have great influence. Some believe that the main reason behind the coup against the Iranian Prime Minister was the nationalization of Iran's oil industry, which had been mainly controlled by the AIOC, which is the British-owned Anglo-Iranian oil company, commonly known today as BP. Led by the efforts of Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh and Ayatollah Kashani, the nationalization of the country's oil industry made them popular with Iranians who felt that for the first time they were taking control of their own country's affairs. Many also expected that it would result in a massive increase in Iran's retained share of the region's oil-generated wealth. Britain, who had been leery of the distribution of the region's oil falling away from their control, found themselves faced with a leader that had the strong backing of the Iranian parliament and people who was now demanding more favorable concessionary arrangements than they were willing to concede. These actions set the stage for the coup against the democratically elected government of Prime Minister Mossadegh 2 years later in 1953. Known as Operation Ajax, the coup was carried out, but only after an earlier coup attempt failed to overthrow Mossadegh, that was to install General Fazlollah Zahedi. Zahedi was widely known as the Shah's ally when he was Prime Minister, and as a result, the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, fled to Baghdad because of the failed coup attempt. Days before the first coup attempt, Mossadegh, who obviously had been forewarned, dissolved parliament to get rid of the Shah's close allies, giving himself and his cabinet more ruling powers, while simultaneously effectively stripping the Shah of his. Nonetheless, with the success of the second coup, Zahedi was installed as Prime Minister, and the Shah returned to Iran and effectively ruled as monarch. Mossadegh was then arrested, tried, and convicted of treason by the Shah's military court. He was sentenced to death, but on the Shah's personal orders, his sentence was commuted to 3 years in solitary confinement in a military prison, followed by house arrest, under which he remained until his death. Now that we've identified the circumstance behind which the relationship between these countries started their decline, let's look at some of the events that bring us to where these countries stand today. Fast forward to 1979. This was the year of the Iranian Revolution, a seismic event that saw the overthrow of the Pahlavi dynasty and the establishment of the Islamic Republic under Ayatollah Khomeini. This was a transformative moment for Iran that would not only shape the course of its relationship with the United States, but also with the world. The Iranian Revolution was fueled by a potent mix of religious and political reasons, but also by a deep-seated resentment against foreign political interference, especially from the US, which had been a staunch supporter of the Shah's regime. Against this backdrop, the US became a target. In November 1979, a group of Iranian students stormed the American embassy in Tehran, taking 52 American diplomats and citizens hostage. This event, known as the Iran hostage crisis, lasted for a staggering 444 days. The hostage crisis was a turning point. The images of blindfolded American hostages, broadcasted across television screens worldwide, stoked outrage in the United States and hardened its stance against Iran. It was a time of high drama and intense negotiations, with failed rescue attempts and a diplomatic deadlock that lasted well over a year. The crisis ended with the release of the hostages in January 1981, but the damage had been done. The hostage crisis had driven a deep wedge between Iran and the US, one that would be hard to bridge. It eroded trust, fueled animosity, and set the tone for the adversarial relationship that would persist for decades. The events of 1979 left a deep scar on Iran-US relations, setting the stage for decades of tension. As we move into the 21st century, a new issue takes center stage in the Iran-US conflict: Nuclear power. The dawn of the new millennium saw Iran's nuclear ambitions come under the international spotlight. Iran, a nation rich in oil and gas, began to show interest in nuclear energy. The US, however, viewed this with a suspicious eye, fearing that Iran's nuclear program might be a smokescreen for developing nuclear weapons. Iran insisted that its nuclear ambitions were peaceful, aimed at diversifying its energy sources and meeting its growing electricity needs. But the US and other Western powers were not convinced. They worried that a nuclear-armed Iran could destabilize the Middle East and pose a direct threat to US interests and allies. In response to these concerns, the international community, led by the United Nations, imposed a series of sanctions on Iran. These sanctions aimed to cripple Iran's economy and force it to halt its nuclear program. The measures ranged from trade restrictions to freezing financial assets, hitting Iran's oil exports especially hard. Yet Iran remained defiant. It argued that as a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, it had every right to use nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. The country continued its nuclear activities even as the sanctions took a heavy toll on its economy and daily life. The world watched nervously as the nuclear standoff escalated, with neither Iran nor the US showing signs of backing down. Behind the scenes, however, diplomatic efforts were underway to resolve the crisis via the JCPOA. In 2015, a glimmer of hope appeared on the horizon, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA. This was a landmark agreement signed by 7 nations, including Iran and the United States, aiming to curb Iran's nuclear program and foster international peace. But in 2018, the US, under a new administration, abruptly withdrew from the agreement, citing it as flawed and one-sided. The US withdrawal had profound implications. It not only reinstated the economic sanctions on Iran, but also created a ripple effect, leading to a series of escalating tensions between the two nations. Mired by growing world scrutiny, regional political change, religious secularism and economic sanctions, Iran has long felt that its position in the Middle East has been diminished by its neighboring countries and their affiliation with NATO and the US, frequently leading to military outbursts against regional forces and infrastructure to apply pressure designed to stagnate their growth and influence. Although Iran has been linked to many of these military actions in the region, rarely are they directly the military force that performs the attacks. Iran supports proxy groups and engages in proxy warfare in the Middle East as a strategic approach to extend its influence and achieve geopolitical objectives. There are several reasons for this. Proxies often serve Iran's interests by conducting activities deemed favorable to its geopolitical goals. This approach allows Iran to extend its influence across the region while maintaining a degree of plausible deniability in direct involvement. Proxy actions have included attacks on rivals, supporting insurgencies and influencing regional dynamics. Iran seeks to establish itself as a dominant player in the region, and supporting proxy groups allows it to project influence beyond its borders, especially in areas with Shiite populations. Proxy warfare also provides Iran with a tool to counterbalance the influence of rival powers in the region, such as Saudi Arabia and Israel. It allows Iran to shape regional dynamics in its favor. Iran is currently backing the efforts of the Shiite Houthis in their attacks on Mediterranean shipping vessels, Israeli targets of opportunity, and even the US military forces deployed in the region. The US is currently retaliating with targeted strikes on Houthi weapons caches and infrastructure. Iran, as an Islamic republic with Shiite leadership, supports groups that share similar religious and ideological affiliations. This includes backing Shiite militias in Iraq, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and other groups that align with Iran's worldview. It's important to note that this strategy has led to not only tension with the United States, but global tension and conflict. Iran's policies have also created the atmosphere in which the majority of the world views their government's actions as reprehensible. Maybe a future generation of Iranians will vote out their current leadership and its way of thinking in favor of moving the country in a direction more suited to global inclusion. Until then, we can fully expect that there will be more actions taken by both these nations to further fuel the existing divisions between them. Thanks for watching. Please check back often if you enjoy our content, as new content is always being created.